It's kind of nice to see faces here today. People who have here almost already as well. Many, many years. Cam, do you think they who? Well, it occurred to me as I was sitting there before I tried to make this animal work, that there is actually a chance that I have worked with Bob Taylor longer than anyone in this room, because I met Bob in 1970, and I began working closely with him immediately thereafter. And although I'm sure there are people who have worked with him longer, or from an earlier date, I doubt that there are any of you who for 26 years have gone to the same place as Bob Taylor and been within a few feet of him. Now, this happened in Bob's second life.
How can you throw that?
Right. This was in Bob's second life, and Bob has told us that he actually has had about 4 lives. First with NASA, secondly with ARPA, then, of course, in what is probably his most famous position as the manager of the computer science laboratory at Xerox PARC, and finally as the director of the System Research Center at Digital. In those last 2 lives, I was there, Charlie. And I have the white hair proven. So it's been an excellent 25 years for me, and I hope that for those of you who are now working with Bob, you will look back on those 25 years and perhaps share some of your memories with us. I must admit that I've always been tremendously impressed by Bob Taylor, because I've never actually seen him fail at anything. Occasionally, when he says something, people don't quite understand him, but they generally do. Butler and I have had that property. Bob has said something profound, and it's taken us a couple of years to figure out what he was saying. But actually, I have only seen him fail in one instance in his life. And do you remember what that was, Bob?
There's more than one, Chuck.
In this case, we had a fellow who came to us from Great Britain, and Bob took it upon himself to teach this person to say iron wire in the way that Texans say. I can only try with something like iron wall. Bob never was able to teach that poor Fred how to say iron wire. But by and large, he has been relatively successful in almost everything else. there was some comment at that table that if this area slid due perhaps to an earthquake down the hill, there would be an awful lot of tenure opportunities for young new computer scientists. And I think that in many cases those opportunities would come from people who have worked with or have been influenced by Bob. So we have several people that want to say some things, and then I would like to invite all of you to share perhaps some of your remembrances of Bob. Actually, I thought of starting this out by, rather than by looking for visitors, by saying, dearly beloved. Well, I was not really leaving us. The way I think about it, he is sitting up in his eyrie over there, looking down on Silicon Valley and watching for who's being naughty and who's being nice. So, at this point, I'd like to call on Butler, who has been doing this for a long time too, to share some of his reminiscences and.
Well, I guess my association with Bob dates back a little bit farther than Chuck's. Not too much. I was a graduate student at Berkeley on the Genie project, which gave rise to the SDS 940, and was funded by ARPA. And I can remember when both Ivan Sutherland and Bob Taylor came by from ARPA to exercise the limited amount of surveillance that they imposed on the projects that they funded in the 1960s. Things were much different then, and much better than they are today. There was basically only one ARPA program manager, and it's a much higher class than the people that we have today. So that must have been in, what, 1966 that I first met Bob. And I worked with Bob for 25 years, from 1971 until last year, first at Clark, and then and I remember lots of things about our years together, but I would just share a couple of them. So I remember that shortly after Chuck and I and other people from BCC joined Xerox, we decided that the first thing we would have to do is build a computer, because Xerox had about a year previously bought Scientific Data Systems, and Scientific Data Systems made a computer which was not really very suitable to use in a research lab in the 1970s, because everyone else's research lab had PDP-10s. And unfortunately, the PDP-10 was a major competitor to the major machine that SDS made. And so we decided that we would have to build a PDP-10. We felt it would be too difficult to buy one because of the fact that we would be buying a competitor's machine, and obviously the sales force was going to get a thing out of this. So we had to do an elaborate cost justification of why this was a good idea. Because there was a beam counter that insisted on seeing a lot of numbers. So we laboriously made up numbers to show that it was going to cost us something $100,000 to build this machine. And on the other hand, if we bought the XDS machine, we would have to spend $4 million to duplicate all the software. So it was obviously a much better deal to build a machine. And Bob was running the lab and supported us in this endeavor. But the support was somewhat qualified, because while he was supporting us, he was telling us that he really thought that we ought to be considering an alternative. And he tried to explain to us what the alternative was, but we couldn't understand it. And we went round on that 2 or 3 times, and Bob would do it, and well, you know, you guys are the technical experts, of course, so make sure you're doing the right thing, blah, blah, blah. And we forgot about it. And it wasn't until about 2.5 years later, I guess, that we realized that at the time he'd been telling us that what we ought to be doing is we shouldn't have been building the PDP-10, we should have been building the Alto. But it took us 2 or 3 years to actually figure that out. Because the master often speaks in somewhat inscrutable deeper and more profound interpretation of this. His humble disciples are able to provide time. So in retrospect, you can really see that the path has actually been plotted out years in advance, and we're just sort of following. following the footsteps of the master. Other incident I remember is every now and then I would have significant disagreements with Father. I can't actually remember what the subject of this particular disagreement was, but I do remember very well that I ran into Bob in the San Francisco airport. I was coming back from a trip and he was leaving on the trip, and we collided at the top of the escalator in the concourse. And I felt very strongly that we ought to do something or other that we weren't doing. And so I started to discuss this with Bob. The intensity of the discussion increased over the course of time. And after about 5 minutes, we were yelling at each other. And we stood there for about 10 minutes in San Francisco, we were yelling at each other about this, whatever it was. I can't even remember. And I guess after that thing sorted themselves out, I said I can't remember anything about it except the intensity of the encounter. Well, we worked together for a long time, and all of it was great. It's really nothing that testifies to that as much as the collection of people that have gathered here today. And nearly all of them, just a few honorable exceptions, date from the period Bob and I have worked together. It's been a wonderful thing for me and the rest of all of us.
One of the things that I didn't know a couple of years ago, David Jefferson joined Nichols Network Systems Laboratory, was that he too had known Bob in a much earlier time. And David does not have one here.
Or has any here.
I knew Bob when he lived in Washington, which was at least before 1970. So we wanted to find out a little more about this, and so we asked David to share some of his recollections from it with us.
Yeah, it's true. I was 17 years old, and I lived in Beltsville, Maryland, where Bob happened to live at the time. And we met because my parents bred our dog to his dog. And subsequently, my sisters began to babysit for him, and he heard through my mother that she had a son interested in computers, so he couldn't let that go, and he had to meet me. So somehow, I don't remember exactly when we met, but I'll tell you 2 stories from that time. The first was a New Year's Eve party at Bob's house. Bob was there, and Wesley Clark was there. Now, Wes, I don't know if you even remember this New Year's Eve party.
I do.
Okay. You probably don't remember that I was there.
I do.
And Ivan Sutherland was there, and my parents, and this was a defining moment in my life because, although I did not know who these men really were, I was only 17 years old, they decided to take the opportunity to grill me to see if I really knew anything about computers. And so they asked me a bunch of questions. And I remember a couple of those questions. One was about whether I thought it made sense to have the program counter be just another general register in the machine. And remember, you have to remember, this is 1966, so it's before the PDP-10, before the PDP-11, I think before the 360. This, 7094 was probably, W7094 was probably the dominant machine in the market. So it's that old. And I thought about this, and I thought that on the one hand, I understood that loading this register would mean jumping, which was what they were really trying to get at, but then I thought, no, this was not really a good idea because who would want to do floating point operations on addresses? Anyway, but more or less, I passed that question. The next question they asked me really threw me. They said this was when time sharing was beginning to become widespread, as I recall, and I had used time sharing. I was interested in them, and they asked me, what would you think about getting rid of time sharing from the world, where everybody owned his own computer, his own personal computer? And I assured them that this was an utterly ridiculous notion. And it would just never be economical, and I just flatly dismissed that notion. So they obviously knew something that I did not know in 1966. The next story I'll tell you, I think came from the next spring. As best I can recollect, it would have been spring vacation in 1967. And I was back home, I guess from my freshman year in college. And for some reason or other, Bob was going to take me to the Pentagon. He was at ARPA. And I was going to go see his office at the Pentagon. So I did. Bob owned a Corvette Stingray. And although the traffic in Washington creeped along at 30 miles an hour in the traffic jam, Bob managed to make 50 miles an hour in that car. We got to his office, and first he had me read a proposal. It came from some group on one ship in the Navy, and they proposed to design and build their own computer. I didn't find out later that Bob had already dismissed this proposal completely as being ridiculous that the single ship should design its own computer. And he had dismissed it as well because it had no memory protection. But he had me read the proposal anyway and give him some comments on it, which I did, and I found a few small things wrong with it that I thought were wrong. Then he sent me down to the computer, and this I didn't appreciate at the time. But it was connected across the United States to a computer at RAM. And there was this programming system on it, an interactive programming system where instead of going through the compile, load, go cycle, you would change a line of the program and immediately re-execute it. The cycle that I was familiar with was broken, and I was completely enchanted by this. The fact that the computer was across the country in what was node 1 of the ARPANET, or I guess what would later become the ARPANET, was completely lost on me. I barely noticed that fact. I did notice the delay. I was interested in it, but I was completely lost about that. Now, of course, I work at the Network Systems Lab here, and so 30 years later, things have come full circle for me. Anyway, I've never worked for Bob. I've always kept in touch with him, though, after all these years. It's been a fine association for me, and I'm proud to know him, and I hope you enjoy those stories. And I have more for those of you who
Actually, one subject came up before this, and we wanted to conduct a little survey just to check to see how historical this audience actually is. How many people here wrote a computer program before the year 1960?
How many people alive before the
We're going to figure this out just a little bit. That's Warren and Dick Sykes. He still looks young. Yes, less. All right, let's try 1955. Where are we? West and West. 1955.
Easy, guys. Hand up, Doug. What, spin rate?
Yeah. Spin rate has his hand.
Okay, so there are 4 hands. 1953. We're about to have a winner. 1950. 51. 252.
Yeah, okay. Hey, Wes, you really are old.
What machine, Wes?
Roland.
Whirlwind. Doug?
Some IBM car
Well, actually, there is someone in this audience who knew Bob even before then, I believe.
Your mother?
He would like to share very early remembrance of Bob with us today, and that's Bob M. Bob has spent a lot of his time flying airplanes around and done a lot of other things that I don't really know, but I've seen him infrequently over the years. And welcome today.
I've been fortunate to keep in touch with Bob over the years as he's going through his career. And like the previous speaker, I had no appreciation for what I was seeing. I just thought it was kind of neat stuff because I like technology. And I professed to be an engineer of some ilk, but not very good, and certainly not computer science. So back in '51, I graduated from high school and went to Southern Methodist University and joined a fraternity that Bob was in. That's when I first met him. He was an upperclassman. The following year, moved out of the fraternity house into an apartment, and the titular landlord was Bob Taylor. As many of you probably understand who work with him, if you work with him, you probably work for him. Bob had an idea of what was supposed to be done and how it was supposed to work since time began. Now, for those of you who think he had humility at some point in his life, I have it from reliable sources back when he was in high school and before those days that he knew what he was after. And having read all the books he sent me about what he's done, and other people that have been associated with him, many of whom are here, and some of you I've met over the years as I went to War College in '68, and he took me to MIT and showed me some whiz-bang stuff. And he bailed me out in '75, I think it was, when I had R&D money in the Department of the Navy. There was something called decision aids. And I came to learn that the people that were peddling these things for us and wanting our government money were some of Bob's favorite computer science people. They were artificial intelligence folks. And Bob had an opinion about everything, and he shared that with me as to what we could do with this money that we were spending and when we might see something. Because I was from the fleet. I wanted something today, and boy, this computer stuff is really neat, and we could probably do some good stuff. And so these decision aids people were showing us what kind of things or stuff they could do, but it was almost back of an envelope stuff, but you got to do it on a back envelope conceptually before you can put it in the machine. And they were showing us this stuff, and we said, boy, that really got potential. So I said, Bob, I have no idea what all this stuff means. I have no perspective, but we're supposed to give them money, and I don't know if this stuff is worth anything or not. And so we had a meeting in San Diego. Bob flew down from San Francisco on his own nickel to help this poor Navy guy understand what was going on. And of course, we had lots of people that wanted our money. So this was a pretty nice conference, and I was amazed by all these people who were down here. And Bob got me aside and told me how it was. And I'm saying there's 5 years to do what, and then another 5 years before I got. You mean it's going to be 15 years before I got anything I can use? And he says, yep. And I said, oh. This doesn't, today, I can't imagine, 15 years, how about 15 months? And, new stuff was coming out. But back in those days, and the stuff I was going to get probably wasn't going to be worth anything anyway. So I said, oh. And of course, now that's 20 years.
I was optimistic.
That's what I came to understand. Fortunately, they rotated me out of that job, and I went off and retired and go do something else. And I look back on it, we still don't have any of that kind of stuff in the fleet. So and he was right, but I was a hard sell because I had this money I really wanted to spend, and all these guys were promising me everything. And now, as a computer user, and playing with all the software and all this wonderful stuff that Microsoft and everybody else is putting out, I've come to appreciate what Bob knew back in the beginning, and I think Butler's talked about it. We've got these things we just don't understand. Bob's trying to explain to us. We're just not able to comprehend it. So I really enjoyed the association with him. He hasn't changed a bit. In all the years that I've known him, he just is driven, focused, opinionated. But generally, the thing that bothers me the most is he's been right. So, I'm really honored to be his friend and to be here today and to be here with all you folks.
when Bob decided on consideration to leave Xerox PARC and try something else, there were a lot of discussions with a number of people throughout the world about what we should do. And we finally had a discussion with a person who has been very wise counsel to us all over the length of existence of the Systems Research Center. And I'd like to ask him to come up and say a few words to us now. This is Sam Fuller.
Trouble right here.
It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here to talk to all of you. I'm delighted. I will try, many things I'd like to say to Bob and about Bob, but I'm going to try and keep them relatively short. One of the things Bob's always reminding me from time to time is I'm often too serious. So I will make a couple of attempts, Bob, to add some humor to this. But before I do that, I have to say I've learned an enormous amount from him. When Chuck was talking, he said 25 years. I think it's been a little over 12 and a half years that I've been working with Bob. So it's only half the time, but I've learned a lot. And so the first thing I wanted to say is there's no doubt in my mind that what Bob leaves as he steps down from being director of the VPRI is he leaves a computing research center of absolutely unparalleled and outstanding quality. I'm sure the same can be said for Xerox and PARC as he left there. But speaking for myself and for the company, there's an absolutely outstanding job that he's done, and a lot of that bears direct response to his work and his focus. So it's been of enormous value to the company. The things that have come out of it, I mean, the most recent example is Alta Vista, but it goes well back into distributed personal computing, the ADUs, other things that have come out of networking that have been quite important. The other half of it, I believe, is that it's been of immeasurable value to hundreds of computer scientists. I'm happy to say a good number of them in the room here today. Employees of CERC and before that PARC, and some interns that were here for a short amount of time that went on to other places. So in addition to whatever benefit, which has been substantial to the company, and the companies he's helped set up research centers, to individuals in the field, I think he's been an enormous contribution. I think that's often undersaid and underrepresented. As I think about that, though, I think what is maybe less understood, the consequences of PARC and now CERC are obvious to people that look at those centers. People that don't work with them directly, I think, don't sometimes understand why that is. And as I've tried to look at Bob's, try to learn from Bob's management and direction, the time that I've known him, the thing that stands out with, in my mind about him is his focus on quality. First and foremost, the quality of the people that he attracts and hires. There are a good number of relatively famous people that he's attracted, both at PARC and CERC, and a lot of people know those names. But I've been really equally impressed with his ability to focus on recruiting young people. As I think Dave Jefferson mentioned a bit before, his ability to detect when there's some real talent in a young person, as yet undiscovered, and help them along. Sometimes I'd come out to CERC these last few years, and I'd wait while he had lunch with the newest set of employees or hires at CERC, either interns or regular employees, where he talked with them about what they were up to, what their ambitions might be. And for that, I think, is one of his unique qualities. And as you look beyond the people, junior as well as senior, and you look at other parts of what I've come to understand to be his management style at CERC, the research reports that numbers of people, both inside and outside the company, have gotten on a regular basis, and I'll get comments. I'm delighted to see Don Clint here. And one of his comments where he said the research reports out of CERC was one of the best examples of research output of an industrial lab. And I was delighted to get that letter done. Beyond that, the company is the things that wants to put better management principles in place a couple of years back, but I had to understand how to do performance reviews better. in reality, what Bob had instituted at CERC years before was, I think, any measure, an outstanding way to do peer review. I thought that was absolutely outstanding. And as a couple other people have pointed out before me now, this focus on quality goes right down to the actual facility he's in. Just drive some people up the wall, but the focus leaves no stone unturned. And he's, from small as well as the important issues, he's focused on quality. I'll try and remember anything in the years ahead. From what I learned from Bob is that there's no substitute for quality. First of all, the people, and then the environment that you build around the people to let them do the work. That's great. Now, one of the other tasks I had over the past decade here at DEC was I get the chance to sit down and talk with middle-level managers at DEC after they'd come back from a visit at CERC. They'd always come back with strong reactions. Some positive, some negative. It never left them unimpressed. I had two observations as I did this. One is, if the person was in sales, they always came back positively impressed. They came back either with their sales team or with a set of customers, either talking with Bob or people in CERC, with a vision of what the future looked like. And to them, it was quite inspiring. And they always came back thanking me for the opportunity to let them or their salespeople go by and interact with Bob and some of his folks. It was more mixed if the managers were from engineering, because I think a lot of times the gauntlet was thrown down or the challenge was put out to say, here's some ideas, you guys ought to get this to the marketplace. I think some people would like to have it more neatly wrapped up in a bow, but some engineering managers were great in seeing the opportunities, and some of our networking products and some of the other ideas that are out there now were a result of that, and others had opportunities that were left undone. Now, in the past 2 weeks, as I began to think about these remarks, I run into actually a number of people that have known Bob in years past, and they can't be here, but they wanted to pass on their thoughts. The first one I ran into 2 weeks ago was Bob Everett, and Bob Everett really wanted to pass on his best wishes to you, Bob. He's sorry he couldn't be here this month. He said that the several visits he's had out to CERC, he found quite inspiring, quite impressed with dealing with the qualities of people, and hopes to actually come out and see you and CERC again in the months ahead. But Bob Everett certainly passes on his thanks. 2 weeks ago, I got a chance to talk to Bill Hefner, Bill Demmer's retirement party. And Bill Hefner passes on his regards, and he wants to know that now that you're retiring, whether it's possible to close the hot tub at CERC. Never ceased to mention to me every time I've seen him in the past 12 and a half years. In fact, none ever existed. It's not hurt him from asking.
Well, we'll send him a Modular 3 book.
I would be glad to. Now, Bob, before I sit down, if I can just get you to come up here for a minute, I had something I wanted to give you.
I'm going to get equal time, right, Chuck?
We'll see. Some of you may remember back on the 5th anniversary of CERC, downtown Palo Alto.
Gloves.
I gave a present to Bob, and as some of you may know, Bob has an aversion to going to the East Coast in the wintertime.
Third world. Stay away from it.
But I came to find after several years, in Bob's mind, New England only has 2 seasons, winter and the 4th of July. So when it comes to wintertime, it left a very small opportunity for him to come back east. But
July isn't very nice either.
Great.
This year. So it's the 5th anniversary of CERC. I gave him a scarf and some gloves, and I think that in fact convinced him to come back, I think twice. More than once.
I wore them more than once.
Okay, well, so
Thank God, too. I
So-
had to scrape ice off the windshield. You ever do that with a bare hand? It's not fun.
so I'm hoping to still see him even after he retires.
As long as you come out here, I'll see you.
Too gentle with my last of presents to me. So I thought I'd bring some other things that might make
I have
it
a parka already.
more practical for you to come back east from time to time. What I got. continue to see it. Let's go for it.
Well, when it's cold out here, I'll wear this.
So, just again, I want to thank you for the past 12 plus years.
I thank you,
It's been a
Sam.
pleasure. I've learned a lot, and
I wouldn't have been here without you.
Thanks for your keyboards. Isn't that amazing? One of the things that is going to bother me a lot now that Bob is retiring is that Roy is actually going to be the acting manager of CERC. For quite a few years, I have corrected Bob when he has made errors at the center meeting. He does this from time to time, pronunciation errors, missing someone's name. He's getting a little older now. And I realized that I won't be able to do that with Roy, because Bob has an incredibly thick skin. Roy isn't quite so thick skin. Thick skin. Finally, the last person that we'd like to talk by prearrangement is Bob Supnik. Bob is now managing research at Digital, and so far has actually been very successful. For many years, SRC had a subsidized Coke machine. This was at the time when cafeterias on the East Coast were subsidized. We had no cafeteria at SRC, so we turned the subsidy into the subsidies for the Coke machine. When the company began to do
The Dr. Pepper machine.
somewhat. The subsidy was removed, and the price of Coke and Dr. Pepper, by the way, went up to 75 cents. Now, this caused Bob Taylor, of course, to bring in his own Dr. Pepper by the pallet load. Since he buys it by the pallet load, and it's stored in a special locked vault and transferred from there in 6 packs to a refrigerator. But Bob Supnik's first access upon taking over research was to restore the Coke machine subsidies. So if you look out across the bay, you will find only one place in the Bay Area where it's possible to buy a Coke for 35 cents. This is due to Bob Supnik.
Thank you, Chuck. I should certainly be the last person to ever disagree with Bob, but New England actually has 4 seasons. Too hot, too cold, too buggy, and fall. I actually had about an hour and a half's notice of this. Mike carefully informed me over the second glass of wine that I was speaking, so there's no notes, and the stories will be impromptu. And I've only had the pleasure of knowing Bob during his digital career. When those of you who are at CSL were dealing lightning with both hands, I was engaged in learning the messy business of what a FET was in a semiconductor device, and then back when you were founding the network that we all use every day, I actually believe I was studying the archives of the Russian and German empires, or something really appropriate to my future like that. Bob has thoughtfully given some of us a farewell present of some of his favorite sonatas, and looking through the titles, I can't really think that Moonlight is an appropriate subject for today, and certainly if you look back on Bob's career, Pathétique doesn't work at all. You could say that L'Adieu is in fact the subject, but when I think of Bob's career at Digital, I think Appassionata is the appropriate thing to work on, because if there was one thing that Bob Taylor brought to the subject of research and the advancement of the art, it was passion. A passion that he never surrendered through good times and bad, and that he impressed upon everyone that he met. If I may paraphrase a somewhat better speaker than I, the systems that people build live after them. The good is often buried with their bones. The system that Bob built of doing research, of advancing what we know about computers, will live after him. And the monument is the fact that here, gathered today, we have at least 3 generations of people who have felt his influence. From people back in the ARPA days down to our newest interns who have thoughtfully come out to have a better be seen in the projects that were done, in the deliverables that were made. The incorporeal is the fact that today, after the most brutal bloodbath in the history of the computer company industry, Digital Equipment Corporation still stands for technical innovation, still invests in research, still believes that the method of industrial research is in fact the way to bring technical and business solutions to people. This is Bob's particular achievement at Digital. And this is one that people will never be able to forget. So though Bob's spirit has now migrated from the 4th floor of SRC down to the 2nd, to be replaced, I believe, by a lava lamp in the office. The analogy that someone used earlier of the brooding spirit up on the mountain looking over Silicon Valley, I think is entirely appropriate. Because whatever the passion, whatever the words, and Bob was never one to disguise his opinions, never one to tolerate idiocy, never one to, in fact, pull his punches. There was behind there a fierce, independent, and determined spirit for the advancement of the art. And he has done that, as much as any individual in the history of computers that we can think of. So on behalf of Digital Equipment Corporation, and as a person who has had as many clashes with Bob as he has had agreements, I would say thank you. Thank you for all you have done. Thank you for all you will do for us. Thank you for staying with us. And thank you for leaving this incredible legacy behind.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. The research report series has been mentioned earlier, and it's one of the hallmarks of SRC that we have a very excellent series of research reports. This is by and large due to the efforts not only of the researchers, but of two people, James Mason and Cynthia Hickman. In order to make sure that Bob will remember us in his retirement, they have put together a book. And Cynthia, if you would come up now, we'd like to present this book. You don't have to. It's in Catwoman's car.
You didn't warn us it was tonight.
I didn't warn you.
Deputy Keith?
Well, actually, there are many other presentations. Let's see. This is from Schroeder to there is no copy to purchase. No, you're right. I didn't let you know, but you did. Several other people have mentioned that they have some memorabilia that they have dug out. In some cases, actually, I believe someone found something in a tomb that was 1,200 years old. But it's still a tailored piece of memorabilia. So, Patrick, did you say you had something to contribute to this? Why don't you come up and tell us about it?
So I met Bob in the fall of '69. I joined the University of Utah as a graduate student. And to me, that period of '69-'70 is a date that I will remember forever for two reasons. First, it was a period of discovery that was amazing for me. I barely knew English. I'd only been once to this country, visited New York as a student, and I'd done a bit of computing before, programming Fortran on an IBM machine. And indeed, his arrival in Salt Lake City was the beginning of something completely different. I learned English, I did some computing, I traveled to this country, which I learned to love and like. And even though I left after 10 years, I've been associated in many ways. So that's very important to me. And the second important thing to me associated with that date is that's when I met with Bob. And and I only came to realize a little bit afterwards that it was going to be very important to me, since I remained associated with Bob on and off for almost 25 years, or more than 25 years. First at Salt Lake City, a short while, and then Park, and then sometime later at Digital. So as a memento of that period, I'd like to bring a present from Paris. It's not perfume or no wine. It's something that a friend of mine, who's also a friend of Bob and of many of you, Henri Bourreau, dug up from his attic a few weeks ago. And not being able to attend this event, he gave it to me and suggested I present it to Bob. So that says February 13, 1970. I'm sure, Bob, you don't have any idea what happened on that date. So please recover.
This is Patrick Baudelaire. Most of what he said is true. He and Henri were postgraduate student friends of mine. That year I was at the University of Utah. Alan and Kelly, were you there? You were there for
I just graduated, I was on the faculty that year.
But Dave Evans was chairman of the department there, and he and Ivan had recently opened up something called the Evans and Sutherland Computer Corporation.
Fair enough.
You think? Yes, they always told me that was rude. They were driving me. He's right, I have no idea what this is. Oh, but now it's beginning to come back.
Oh my God.
Thank you for not blowing it up. Well, I recall that at my house we had a costume party. Is that where we And the costumes that people wore were somewhat, well, you can't see from there, but let's say some of them were brief. This is Salt Lake City, you understand? The irreverent among us would refer to it as short-leg shitty. There were some Salt Lake residents at this party who were not terribly pleased with So would you please thank Henri for me?
Say your webpage.
This in return for the attic.
Oh, good. My attic. Can I talk? I'll take my
Just stay.
Don't pass
Another person who does
Probably. See.
some people who asked me to make this presentation. So, Charles Simonyi is an interesting fellow. Many of you know, I met him in 1968, Charles. When we were building a computer together. I was building the hardware and he was building the software. And we shared the computer. I worked on it during the day and he worked on it at night. And Charles came in. Charles had just left Hungary and decided that he was going to be very wealthy, so it was okay to take on a lot of debt. So he bought a lot of Vogue. Charles is actually the only person I know today who have had a subscription to Vogue. But my wife's parents was always amazed at Charles because Charles would come to work in order to debug this computer, impeccably dressed in this thing that he called his debugging suit, which was stark black, semi-transparent shirt, black. So a little bit later, we both went to work for Bob, and Charles has done other things in between. Tell us about it, Charles.
Thank you very much. You did mention that the pants were transparent too. I decided not to wear them since this is Bob's day. I only said I would do this so that I can see the pictures. It was worth it. I'll be very, very short, and I just want to express my thanks to Bob for basically for preparing me to deal with the three most powerful forces of the 20th century. And I'm known for hyperbole and exaggeration, but without exaggerating, I can say that one of these is the personal computer, and people have mentioned Bob's contribution of starting the personal computer revolution. The second of these incredibly powerful forces is, I believe, the internet. And people have talked about his contributions through the ARPANET and other ways to the internet. And since these have been mentioned, I'd like to focus on the third very powerful force, which has not been mentioned yet, that being football. Apparently, Bob didn't have much to do with founding the industry. He did a lot in propagating, being a vector of the knowledge of football. And I will always remember the Dutch football games that he organized. And I want to share with you the lesson that I've learned during these games. And this lesson is that football is really a metaphor for civilization. That human civilization started when the cavemen, instead of fighting, either the other cavemen or the tigers, found a quiet corner in the cave, and then abstraction and thinking and abstraction began. And that's how civilization started. And if you look at all the sports, people are always under attack. So people have to, there's no room for abstracting and for planning. There's no room for civilization, except for football. When there's a huddle, well, people are not being attacked, and then Bob was advancing civilization in the huddle. So, in memory of the third, and maybe as a mnemonic for the first two important forces, I'd like to present Bob. I happen to know that he is a big fan of the 49ers. So I have a game ball here from the 49ers with Jerry Rice, I believe.
Wow. Now we're talking, folks. I'm going to show you this.
Oh, I wasn't bluffing. Careful with that.
Charles says, look out for the signatures.
All right. Steve Young and Jerry Rice. And pumped up to official pressure. Nice job, Charles. Do you still have the Jaguar?
No, I don't. I saw it at park. Yeah, I bought the Lamborghini.
Why is
I was the only engineer number 2 with a Lamborghini.
What about the MiG? Did you buy the MiG or did you just fly it?
I rented it.
We have two.
The F5B.
We have two jet pilots here today. Charles Simonyi, who is a jet pilot, having flown. How many different jets have you flown?
I don't know.
The number.
Half a dozen.
Yeah. You could call him an amateur, except he's flown a half a dozen different airplanes.
So he's still here.
Right. He's still here, right. There are no O.
There are no bowl pilots. I was at
There are no O.
I'm certainly not bold, and I don't think I'm old.
Did you fly down on your own plane? Which one did you bring?
The Lear.
Did you have passengers?
No, but I hope I'm taking something.
Well, I asked Butler once.
I offered.
I asked Butler once when he was down here, I said, when you were here too, I think it was for the Gates Building dedication to Stanford. I said, well, didn't you fly down with Charles? No. I didn't know Charles was flying down. I said, well, maybe he wants to protect you.
Good thought.
So I really appreciate this football more than, but I'm sure you realize how much I appreciate this football that other folks might not.
Yes, I think it was, we would have been amiss not to mention.
Absolutely appropriate.
Me, Bill plays football too.
I figure he must be a computer scientist now since he has his name on a computer science building.
Many of you know the functional side of an organization is often very, very important. The technical people that work at CERT are only one part of CERT. And we used to have what were called personnel people. Now they're called human resources people. And their job are to help us hone our human resources in order to more rapidly move new technologies into the world. And our human resources person at SRC has been Betsy Sutter. And I've actually seen Betsy and Bob argue quite a bit about various things, but they do usually have a united front when dealing with others. So Betsy said she would like to say a few words about Bob, because after today, he probably couldn't get back at her. Don't count on it.
Coding is circus and cake job. That's all I have. Not much to get down. So I've known Bob for about 8 years, and I've been his HR person. And over the years, we've had many robust conversations. And Bob doesn't like to argue as much as I do, but we would tend to get into arguments pretty regularly. And I noticed that when Bob would start to lose an argument, he'd start to attack me, usually attacking my academic background. And say I knew nothing about anything. He'd usually go to the classics, because I was a history and English major, and ask me what I had read or what I had not read. So over the years, I would find little pearls of wisdom bestowed upon me, like Stendhal's The Black, Red and the Black, and with inscriptions in them to compensate for the Chico State disadvantage. I'd just like to say that I did not go to Chico State. I'm a UC Berkeley alumni, and over the years I've tried to convince Bob of this, but I haven't gotten I made a special trip up to my alma mater, Chico State. Long drive. So, I have another little item for Bob, because we all know that he's going to retire now, and he's probably going to spend most of his time with Max, the dog, and probably on the tennis court. Maybe tossing around football now.
Don't forget the tomatoes.
But my husband and I have spent a lot of time developing something that we think will help Bob on the tennis court, because sometimes it's really difficult to get those shots as quickly as we want to, especially as we're...
Now wait a minute, what about how have you done against me in tennis?
Well, when I worked for you, I had to let you in.
I see.
So over the years, Bob and I have gone onto the tennis court unless I needed to have something good happen at the office. So anyway, Doug and I have made this thing, and we may patent it if you like it. And there you are. It's a tennis racket extender for you.
Tell Doug I don't think the patent office would be interested.
Looks like you could use it as a cane, too.
My turn yet?
Well, I don't know.
That's making my turn.
Those are all...
It's getting close to quitting time. And I'm retired.
No, I want to say some things. I know. But we have the rest of us aren't done yet, Bob. As I was about to say, this is the this was the last set presentation. But I'm willing to take volunteers because if no one volunteers, Bob wants equal time.
What can I say about old Bob Taylor? Well, let's see. No, I'll make this short. It's perfect after the tennis example because Bob and I used to play a lot of table tennis at the beginning of Xerox Park. Bob hired me among a group of, I guess there were 7 of us from Berkeley Computer Corporation to be more or less the colonel of the computer science lab. And I've been grateful ever since, really. It was a wonderful experience. Someone mentioned Bob's passion, and that certainly was my experience of him too. And one of the ways that passion manifested itself was in competitiveness in whatever he did. And we played a bunch of sports in the early days, touch football and softball. In softball, Bob would call off all the other infielders whenever there was a pop-up so that he could get that pop-up. I said, Bob, these other people came to play too, right? And he said, but they might miss it. Don't you want to win? And I appreciated that. Anyway, we played a lot of table tennis too. And we talked a lot while we were playing about technical things and other things. And I learned a lot from Bob in those days. He was a straight shooter, and he called him as he saw him. He played with passion, and I only made one mistake, which is that I beat him consistently. He never quite forgave me for that. But anyway, Bob is one of those people who's relatively in the background as far as the general public knows, and yet he, as all of you know, has contributed quite a lot, directly and indirectly. We used to say that Bob pretended not to know anything about computers and computer science, but we all saw through that pretty quickly. And Park was a great place to work, so I can only say we wish you the best, Bob, and thank you so much for sharing that adventure that was Park with me.
Thank you. First echoing Dick, Kurt and I were just remembering a certain 15-hour-long tennis match between him, myself, and Bob. And there's this funny variant of tennis called Australian doubles, where 2 play against 1 and you rotate around. And well, we figured we'd play for a while. And what we discovered is that Bob wouldn't give up as long as he was winning. No matter how we tried to pair up against, we couldn't beat him that day. I remember you in particular, Kurt, were extremely angry. Part of that thing, and it just went on. It was hotter than anything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I lost 13 or 14 pounds. Well, I just
bring
have
water to the tennis court.
That's true. So I just have a couple of things to say. First, when I had my 50th birthday 6 years ago, and I was very surprised in thinking back, because I don't think of myself as a particularly social person, but I was very surprised at what I thought about on that 50th birthday were all of the really interesting people I'd gotten a chance to meet and work with. And in fact, I had this huge wave of missing everybody. I missed that whole setup that we had, and a lot of the stuff that I missed were, I think, primarily due to Bob's understanding social dynamics better than any person I've ever met. The first story is I met him during an ARPA contractors meeting. Back in the 60s, they used to rotate the ARPA contractors meeting in various venues. And one year, I believe in early '68 it was, they decided to have it at the ski lodge at Alta, Utah. And Dave Evans was a remarkable, nurturing soul for his graduate student, wonderful person. He loved to have graduate students learn what was going on. And so he took it upon himself to invite quite a number of his graduate students to go to this ARPA contractors meeting. And the deal was we could go there, we could watch, but we weren't supposed to talk. We just got to observe. But we got to see 3 days worth of people. That's where I first met Butler. Butler was an ARPA contractor by then. And I got to see Bob Taylor in action for the first time. We just got a sense of how things were going. And at the very last session there, Bob asked the graduate students who were sort of sitting around the outside if they had any comments or suggestions. And I remember John Warnock raising his hand and he said, well, Bob, since we graduate students do all the real work anyway, and since we're going to be colleagues later on, don't you think it would be a good idea to have an ARPA graduate student meeting each year? And Bob, true to his form, said, of course, that's a great idea. And Barry Wessler, who's sitting there, ran the first bunch of them. The first one happened the next summer in Alton, Illinois.
I couldn't go, I was over 30.
That's right. And it worked out that way, that the people who met each other there were indeed colleagues thereafter. And I think it gives you a little bit of a flavor of what ARPA was like. Never in my life have I been more befriended by people I didn't know than in the ARPA community. It was a very special place to do work, and it's the thing that sticks most with me. And we had a lot of fun doing technical things back then, but I think that the setting for being colleagues with each other and sharing and all that stuff couldn't have been handled better. And it was only later that I appreciated that it took an immense amount of work to set something like that. I had a chance to see it a little bit more closely at Xerox PARC because Bob liked to share his thoughts and plans and schemes even with people. And I think one of the things I'll always remember about Bob is that I can never recall an instance where he didn't treat a younger person as anything less than a colleague. And I believe that you cannot ever thank a person adequately enough for that except to try and pass it along. And I think most of us have tried to. Thanks, Bob.
I was 23 years old when I went to work for Bob, and he didn't treat me like a colleague, he treated me like putty in his hands. He decided that he was going to undertake my education, and I had been to MIT and all of that, which of course meant nothing to Bob, and he he gave me an education that was, it's surprising that more people haven't talked about how Bob helped people socially grow. And unfortunately, most of the really good stories I can't tell because obviously 2 generations of Taylors are here. And to tell the stories of Bob, like the time we're in Vietnam together in Saigon at the top of, what was the name of the hotel? On this rooftop garden, and Bob explained to me that there were young ladies at the bar, and that we had to stay away from them because they were very expensive, and we were on government. Our village, and we kept shooing the young ladies away. They would come down and sit down and talk to us, and we would shoo them away. And mine somehow would always go, and this young lady attached herself to Bob, and he kept saying, no, you have to leave because I can't afford to pay you. And she said, no, I simply, all right, I won't tell the story. She kept staying and staying, and finally, it was getting late, and we had to go. And we get up, and Bob says, "Thank you very much," and we're walking toward the elevator of our hotel. And the original girl that sat down beside me came running up to me and said, "Is there something wrong with your friend?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, my friend wants to sleep with him. Can you make the arrangements?" And I said, "I do a lot of stuff for Bob, but I don't do that." I think, and I'll be brief because it really is getting late, and Bob really wants to talk. The other story that, and I had a lot of stories, so that was an easy one, I could tell that. The other story that I think was kind of indicative of the education that Bob gave me was he was telling me the rules at the Pentagon, because we were at the Pentagon together, and how depending on the level that you were at, you had to have your secretary call that guy's secretary, and your secretary had to get you on the phone first if you were beneath, and his secretary had to get him on the phone first if he were beneath you, and all of this nonsense. So Bob said, let's watch this in action. And so he says, Herb Bennington, remember Herb Bennington? He says, Herb Bennington, he's Assistant Secretary of Defense. Let's go talk to him. We're coming back from lunch. And the secretaries were standing out in front, sitting out in front of these guys, the important guy's office, and there were the barriers. You couldn't get through the barriers. And Bob says, "Hi, I'm just going in to talk to her." And she jumps up and says, "No, you can't go in." And Bob trots me into Herb's office and sits down. And as an education about how to get around, he sits down, and Herb is getting, starts getting pink in the face, and then red in the face, and it's getting blue in the face, and the secretary's running in and saying, "Oh, Herb, Mr. Bennington, you have an important meeting." And the wonderful thing is that Bob engaged Herb in a conversation. And you can see her calming down and saying, "Gee, that's really interesting. Maybe we should do something about that." And just as he got her turned around, Bob said, "Barry, we got to go." I remember that. It's been a lifelong thing. I've tried to emulate Bob, and you can't.
I
I have to address myself today. I have to admit, I have not known Bob since before I was born. Start there. And I really have to address myself today to those people who've known Bob maybe for the last decade, maybe the last half decade as I have. And I have to address myself especially to those people who work at CERC, who have worked at CERC recently, and are familiar with the flow of our Wednesdays. So today, we have asked for guests. Today, we have asked for short topics. And today, we have had many of what we regard at CERC as common technical presentations. They are rather short. They assume that you know the topic. And they have excellent, insightful, technical information that we can all use to carry on our idea of computer research. And as those of you who have been invited to stay for the next session of many center meetings, if I were Bob standing right here, right now, I would have to start a discussion which would end in a phrase that would begin with, how many of you would be strongly disappointed? Now, let me digress, because I haven't known Bob for nearly as long as many of the people here, and if you look, I am only at the temple's beginning to join in the august company that I find myself assembled with today. My association with Park did not begin with my association with Bob, as it did with many people here. It began in August of 1977, when I was just beginning to drive, and I bought a copy of Byte magazine. Many of you remember Byte because it came from the Kilobaud magazine, which preceded it. And in August, they had their computer language issue. And in that issue of August 1977, they did a survey of computer languages. And among that survey, they put on the cover a description, an artist's conception of computer languages, which had many features. Many of you will remember the numbered buoys in the water describing Pascal's triangle. Many of you may remember an island shrouded in cloud, shrouded in mystery, the magical Isle of Smalltalk. This was my first knowledge of Park, a place where magical things occur, which if you can swim through the alligator-infested waters to get to that area, none have been known to return. Several years later, I believe in '83 or '84, Byte actually had another August issue that actually focused on the Smalltalk language, focusing on the balloon of Smalltalk escaping from that isle, escaping from Park, and gathering fame and fortune in the world as we know it's taken over. Several years later, through
only to people of high taste.
Many years later, through my own travels through what one might consider computer science, coming from the true third world of San Diego, I ended up at CERC. And much to my surprise, I found that it wasn't the 1 or 2 year stint I thought it would be. But more than 6 years later, I find that it's still the place I would rather be more than anywhere else that I've been offered to go since then. And and sometimes suggested to go, for that matter. At this point, I find that our leader, our director, is leaving. He's been leaving for a while. And we will continue the slow state of glacial progress we're moving that we've grown to enjoy.
You like Yosemite, guys?
I have been scouring the countryside because this is a unique opportunity to find a new person to help direct us towards the future. So I have asked many of my friends, we need a new director. Do you know anybody that would be suitable? They say, well, tell me about your current director. And fortunately, I've been brought up that if you have nothing good to say nothing. So they've asked me these questions. Is he a good day-to-day manager? I don't know. Does he have many technical directions that he drives your laboratory, that he directs your research? I say, well, no, he really doesn't do that at all. And then they ask me, well, what does he do that makes it that you think he has been such an excellent manager and that you have really had a hard time getting somebody else to take his place? And what it really comes down to is that question that he has asked us many times. How many of you would be strongly disappointed? What he asks from us, in my opinion, is not just your technical opinion about which way you should go on a technical question. He asks for your emotional involvement and commitment to drive in new or continued directions. And this is not something that we find in many of the job descriptions for the average manager, or low-level or medium-level manager. This is something that we find in Bob Taylor. And this is something that I think has really driven the people to stick with him, to stick around him, and to grow with him, to help push the research in computers and computer science in directions that lead us to the future. And for that, I, as someone who has not known him for the many years you have, I would very much like to thank him for his direction. And I know that I personally will always look towards his questions towards us as inspiration in driving computer science in the future. So thank you very much.
To enlighten, or the search for enlightenment. And it reminds me of what really binds us together. What binds us together is not the fact that we're interested in computing or computers so much. What binds us together is that we've been searching for enlightenment most of our lives. We work on problems because we are not enlightened about the solutions to those problems. And we can't stay away from trying to find those solutions. So enlightenment is a very important force, and people haven't talked about it very much in the history of man. So I have 4 stories to tell you that are, in one way or another, about enlightenment or its lack. The first story comes from my son Derek. There was this technical conference that a small group of physicists and a small group of computerists were riding on a train to attend. The physicists, as physicists are wont to do, took themselves very seriously, and the computerists, as they are wont to do, did not. Every physicist on the train had a train ticket. Among the group of computerists, there was only one train ticket. And the physicists scoffed, as they like to do. So as the conductor was approaching the car, all the computers went into the bathroom. The conductor went through the car and he said, "Ticket, please," to each physicist. The physicist gave him his ticket. Got to the bathroom, he knocked on the door, he said, "Ticket, please." They shoved the ticket under the door, the conductor went on his way. The computers come out of the bathroom. Physicists are not happy. On the way back from the conference, on the train, the physicists only had one ticket in the group. Computers had no tickets. Again, the physicists are not happy. They're chiding the computers. They're going to get thrown off the shore this time. As the conductor was approaching, all the physicists went in the bathroom, and all the computers went into another bathroom. Before the conductor came into the car, a computerist comes out of the computer bathroom, goes over and knocks on the physicist's bathroom and says, "Ticket." The second story comes to me from Sharon Pearl, courtesy of Supnik. They're both here today. And I'm sure that many of you have heard all of these stories before, but today's my retirement day, so you will indulge me and pretend we've heard them now for the first time. So this story takes place in the time of the French Revolution, and they're killing people who were tried for crimes by guillotine. And a priest is found guilty and sentenced to guillotine, and a drunkard is found guilty and sentenced to guillotine. And a physicist is found guilty. So the priest is brought up to the guillotine, and the priest says, "I have a request." And the executioner says, "Yes." He says, "I'd like to be viewing my maker as I die. So would you please put me into the guillotine face up?" So the executioner says, "Okay." So he puts him in face up, and he pulls the trigger, and the blade comes down, and it stops inches before it gets to the neck of the priest. And the crowd goes, "Ah, it's a miracle. He must be innocent." And the crowd insists that he be released, and he's released. The drunkard comes up and says, "I want the same thing." So they put the drunkard in, and blade comes down, inches before it strikes his neck, it stops dead. And again the crowd goes, "Ah!" And they let him loose. And the physicist comes up and says, "Well, I suppose you want the same thing?" "Well, okay, doesn't matter to me." One heads up, heads down. But they put him in heads up, face up. Before they lower the blade, he says, "Oh, I see your problem." The third story comes to me from my son Kurt. This takes place back in the 50s when, or maybe it was the 60s, I can't remember. It could even be the 70s. Whenever Jack Nicklaus, who's a famous American golfer, was winning the U.S. Open and a lot of titles. And all of the world's historical religious leaders were sitting up in heaven watching the U.S. Open on television and marveling at what they saw. And after it was over, Jesus said to Muhammad and to Buddha, who happened to be sitting around there, "You know, I've always liked that game, and that course is an interesting course, and it's not going to be crowded tomorrow because they just finished the U.S. Open there. So I think I'll get my caddy and go down and play a few holes." And Moses looks at him and said, "Never understood your penchant for these modern things, but sure, go ahead." So he goes down with his caddy, and they're playing this hole that they had seen on television yesterday. And after the drive, there comes a part where there's a water hazard between the next shot and the hole. So there's water between where the ball is and the hole. And Jesus says to his caddy, "What did Nicholas use yesterday on this hole? Because I remember he made a great shot." And the caddy says he used a 7-iron. "But you better use a 6-iron because a 7-iron is not going to carry far enough for you." And Jesus says, "Well, I think I'll use a 7-iron. Caddy shakes his head and hands him the 7-iron. Jesus hits the ball, plop, in the water. "Well, let me have another ball," says Jesus. Gives him another ball. It's another ball, plop, in the water. A third ball, plop, in the water. Caddy is getting more and more discouraged. A fourth ball, plop, in the water. So Jesus kind of shakes his head and hands the club back to the caddy and starts walking across the top of the water to get his golf balls. About this time, a couple of golfers show up. One of them looks out and says, "Who the hell does that guy think he is? Jesus Christ?" The caddy says, "No, he thinks it's Jack Nicklaus." story comes to me from Mike Schroeder. This is a true story, I'm told. Bob Hammond might actually know whether or not this is a true story, since he was a naval aviator, and it's about the Navy. This American warship was sailing, cruising off the coast of Canada, Canadian waters, and its radar told them that they were on a collision course with another vessel. So they radioed and said, "This is an American warship. We are on a collision course. We suggest you change courses immediately." And the radio message came back, "We are Canadians. You're sailing in Canadian water. We suggest you change course." And Americans radioed back, "We are an aircraft carrier of the United States Navy and one of the largest ships afloat. It would really be wise for you to change course." And the message came back, "This is a lighthouse. It's your call." Thank you all for coming. I love you. You've made my life very rich.
Thank you all for coming.
Bob's been the best manager I've ever had. I had occasion 2 weeks ago to point this out to Roger Dinham in Cambridge. Roger sort of smiled at me very seriously and said, "Yes, but it's better to work for Bob than to have Bob work for you."